So that means anything we take action on today is the recommendation of the chair, with the vice chair being here as well. So we'll begin. It is our recommendation, so I'm sorry many of you have been sitting here. We probably could have released you, but can't. So there will be a number of consent items today. Most of these are grant extensions and donations and rewards. There will be consent items 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 16, and 17. If you're here on any of those items, you can be released, and we'll be sending those forward to the council with the recommendation of the chair.
Next week.
We will then call items 5, 9, 11, 13, 14, 15, and, I'm sorry, 12. Was anybody here? I released people on 12. Mr. Zine wanted to hear 12. I'm sorry. Would, do we have somebody in the back ask if it, well, we'll go ahead. You did, I'm sorry. It was on both sides, and so my mistake. We will hear 12. I'm sorry.
No?
We will hear 12.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That was a mistake on my part. We'll begin quickly with item 11 and then go to number 15. Item 11 has just a couple quick questions, so item number 11.
Item 11, John White, City Clerk, Board of Police Commissioners and sale reports relative to the 2010-11 Driving Under the Influence Enforcement and Awareness Program Grant Award.
Matt Cofford, Office of the CAO.
Morning. Commander Blake Chow, Assistant Commanding Officer, Counterterrorism, Special Operations Bureau.
Very good. I had one question. I think Mr. Zine has one quick question. As we go into this program, which is a good program and has been very successful, certainly in other jurisdictions, my question is, we used to have an extremely successful program that ran for very little dollars using a lot of volunteers, was called IBARS. Are we going to look at incorporating that back into this program at all?
Ron, do you want to handle that?
Good morning. Currently, there's no plans in the works that I'm aware of to incorporate such a program with the current grant that we're applying for.
Yeah. Could you identify yourself for the verbal record, please?
Excuse me?
Identify yourself for the record, please.
Lieutenant Ron Katona from Traffic Coordination Section.
Okay, so there's no plans to look at IBARS and bringing that back to life?
Currently, no.
Okay. So we will be using all sworn personnel at these checkpoints. You'll do arrests for DUIs and transport to jails, correctly?
Correctly. We do use a few civilian personnel, but that pretty much...
But there'll be no instant booking and releasing program at all? It's all going to be through the jails, which are really impacted right now?
Correct. As it stands right now, that's
Okay.
the way it is.
And I know Mr. Zine wants to talk about how you distribute the money, but you know, we have a failing jail system. We're closing a number of our jails because we don't have enough jailers, where you have to bring 83 people out of patrol functions into the jails to open the new MDC. And we're going to do a program, which I fully support the program, but we're going to be impacting the jails by putting more people into the jails where we don't have personnel to take care of them. So how are you going to manage that impact? I mean, the impact on a system that's failing is counterproductive. That's why I asked about IBARS, because that was an instant booking release system where we didn't have to bring them into the jails necessarily.
Well, currently we do have a pilot program that's actually being tested out in Valley Bureau. It's called a cite and release program, where we are, under certain circumstances, allowing the officers to make a DUI arrest and cite and release the individual after they've been live scanned, but before they're not booked.
Yeah, they're not booked.
Right, and that's currently, I believe, it's at West Bureau. I stand corrected, and it's probably about 4 or 5 months into the 6-month program.
So they're cited for DUI and released to a family member or something else, or
essentially that's the way it is. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, like I said, I'm fully supportive of this. I think it's a wonderful program. We need to be doing this kind of stuff. I would ask you to go back to command and talk to them about IBARS. It was a program that was almost entirely run by volunteers. So the impact to the patrol function was really minimal, if anything. You had a couple supervisors, that was about it. And it didn't crowd the jails up, and that's what was the beauty of it. So I hope you go back. Please go back and look at that, and
Sure.
and either report back to me privately, your convenience, but I'd like to hear what you can do about that. Mr. Zine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to have that report back to committee if we could. The concern is they're taking officers out of the field and they're putting them into jail so they can open up the Metropolitan Jail. And I understand a number of officers are being removed from the field, going into jail operations, which means fewer officers on the street. Now, I worked DUI for a long time, DUI supervisor in the Valley on the motors for a long time, and I know how many deuces can get booked, DUI drivers, when you have a task force. It's a tremendous load on the jail operations, which are already maxed now without sufficient personnel. The question I have in addition to that is the deployment. How's this going to work citywide? How are they going to select what divisions within the bureaus, how it's going to be deployed?
Essentially what we do is conduct an analysis of the DUI-related TCs and arrests in all 4 geographic bureaus on a weekly basis. And based on that analysis, we determine what divisions and what bureaus that we're going to work.
So it'll be, I assume, citywide, based upon the incidents that have taken place, so some areas may receive more coverage than others?
That is correct.
But it's not going to be applied equally, so many people get a piece of the pie. It's going to go where the problems are.
Primarily, that's the main consideration, but we do some checkpoints in bureaus that don't have as bad of a problem, but in the bureau that we're going to work, we pick the highest, the area with the highest problem, the biggest problem.
Okay. And then on your site and release out of West Bureau, how many of those are not showing up in court?
It's still a pilot program, and they haven't reported back to us, so we're not really up on the numbers yet on the program.
Because I know in the past, I know the Valley Traffic, I don't know if they have it in other traffic divisions, where they have the program on the repeat habitual offenders. They have the court program where they actually monitor who's showing up and getting back in the car and driving again.
Correct. That's part of this grant as well.
Pardon me?
That's part of this grant as well.
Which is a great program, because they think that once they leave court, they're free to jump in their car and drive again. And I've seen that in action. It works extremely well.
Go to the bar and have a drink and celebrate.
And that's what they do. They don't get to the bar before they get popped. But if we can get back the issue of the booking process and how actually that's going to be coordinated with the question that Mr. Smith had regarding that particular operation, we get that back to this committee. The concern is that we have $1.6 million or $1.8 million and officers love overtime, and they love the cash overtime, and it's very limited, as we know right now. So this is a great opportunity for the officers to receive that and to do that job. We just want to make sure it's going to work well. And the other question is, how are they going to select the personnel to do the detail? Is it going to be strictly traffic personnel, or is it going to be open to all personnel within the geographic patrol divisions?
We basically select folks from that are top MAD award winners, or currently working a DUI watch, or working an H2O program in one of the traffic divisions.
So folks that are in traffic that are familiar with the operations.
Correct.
So it's not a training ground, it's experienced personnel you're looking for.
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so there'll be the recommendation of the chair and Mr. Zine that we approve the grant, go forward with that, and ask the commander to report back verbally to us, say, after the first of the year, on the booking plan, how you're going to do it, how you've done it, actually, at that point, and also the possibility of bringing back I-bars as an option. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Number 15.
Item 15, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to the report on the California Commission on the Fair Administration of Justice.
Morning.
You want to be fair?
No, Fair Administration of Justice.
Okay.
Jerry Chaliff, Los Angeles Police Department. The California Commission on the Fair Administration of Justice was created by the State Senate in 2004. The membership consisted of members of law enforcement, the academic world, the criminal justice system, including DAs, judges, and various representatives of the public defender agencies. Chief Bratton was a member of it, and I was his representative on the commission. The Attorney General, Jerry Brown, had a representative on the commission, and others. The commission ultimately issued recommendations in the following areas. eyewitness identification, false confessions, use of informants, problems with scientific evidence, professional responsibility and accountability of prosecutors and defense lawyers, remedies, and the death penalty. Most of the recommendations were adopted almost unanimously, except those relating to the death penalty and a few others. None of the recommendations have been enacted into law. A number have been introduced, passed through the Assembly and Senate, and the governor has vetoed those relating to eyewitness identification and interrogations. And again, and that was in 2007, 2006, and 2007. The legislature again adopted legislation relating to eyewitness identification, interrogations, and the testimony of jailhouse informants. They were all vetoed. I don't know if you want more specific about what the recommendations were and what how the department fits into it.
Just really two questions. One, were these few things that did get up to the governor's desk that were vetoed just during that time frame? He wasn't signing anything because the legislature couldn't pass a bill?
I think that might be some of it. It might have been some of it. There was resistance, to, for example, to the eyewitness identification one from certain law enforcement groups, and the same thing with the use of jailhouse informant interrogations. What happens is some jurisdictions felt that the rules were the recommendations would impose too much of a burden on them. Others just reacted kind of instinctively that things are working well now, why do we want to change it? I don't know. I can't speak for that, but they were vetoed.
So not much has happened with it.
So, yeah.
There's some great recommendations,
Yeah.
and there's some great research that was done, and going into the future, there's a great amount of material. For example, eyewitness identification is still the issue of how do you do that with photographs. Use of jailhouse informants. Los Angeles County, because of what we went through in the late 80s and early 90s, has the best rules for their prosecutors and how they do it. The recommendation was to have others kind of look at those and adopt them. The same thing with interrogations. The recommendations really related to videotaping and tape recording. We don't require it, but we now have newer facilities to have the capacity. There were some recommendations regarding Brady, and we have some pretty stringent rules about maintaining evidence and turning them over to the DA. And in relation to jailhouse informants, that's not a decision that police officers make. That's a decision DAs make. But we have pretty stringent procedures and rules about how to provide that information to the DA, and then what backgrounds are done on the individuals. So I think.
So have you picked and choose the things that you think we should be doing anyway?
Most of them. The one that we had, that Chief Bratton wanted to do a pilot program on, was the eyewitness identification one, which relates to, normally we now use 6-packs. I think I may have one with me. The use of the card with the 6.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it.
Okay, I'm sure Councilman Zion is too.
I've seen them a few times.
And usually done by the investigating officer. The recommendation is that you do them serially, present them one picture at a time, and it's administered by somebody who has no idea who the suspect is, so there's no conscious or subconscious influence on it, and that the other recommendation was that they be tape recorded or videotaped, and that the person be asked how strong their feelings were. We don't have rules relating to that, but we do use the 6-pack. We do require people to write down who they identify and how strong their feeling is. So we haven't done it. We wanted to do the pilot. The district attorney's office objected. So we didn't do the pilot because it didn't make sense to do this process if the DA didn't want it. They had some issues about how it would be in court, how it would affect others. So we didn't go ahead. Chief Bratton decided it wasn't a good idea to go ahead if the DA's office was objecting. And that was in about 2007, I think.
Okay. Mr. Zine?
So how much do you think they spent doing this?
How much the state spent? I have no idea.
Thousands? Millions?
Well, they reimburse people for travel and I think maybe meals, but and maybe there were times when they had hearings. It was like every other hearing was either Northern California or Southern California.
Over 6 years.
Over
How many people?
5 years. There
How
was
many?
about 25 or 30 of us.
So probably a few $1 million of state money expended on a project that sits idle collecting dust.
Well,
why
you
the
could
state-
say that, and not to be defensive of the group.
That's
but-
why the state's broke,
But I
because
think
of these projects that don't go anywhere.
you could argue that the project had some benefit, but the governor chose to veto some of the legislation, so
But we could implement whatever we thought was appropriate for Los Angeles.
we could. However, we have to, for some of these, we'd have to get the DA on board, so that we wouldn't have some tension between the DA, the city attorney, and the police
Well,
department.
there's no tension between the DA and the city attorney now.
I think I was talking about tension between them and us. So- And as far as how they get along, you'd probably know better than I would.
I do. No, it's an interesting project. It's sad that it didn't go anywhere. That's the frustrating part.
There's some great suggestions. As a former defense lawyer, probably still think of myself as a defense lawyer, putting some of these in place, and I found it interesting that law enforcement objected because it would make it much harder to attack some of the evidence. If you have a videotape of the confession, if you have a videotape of the identification process, with the use of jailhouse informants, if there's a rigid procedures for doing it, it just would leave less for the defense to attack, but it turned out that the governor chose to veto those.
Former defense lawyer who finally found the right path.
You could say that.
Making amends for the early part of his career. All right, that'll be a note and file. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Thank you.
Number 5.
Item 5. Council members, did you act on item 9?
Haven't pulled it yet.
Not yet? Okay.
No.
Item 5, Board of Fire Commissioners report relative to a proposal by the fire department to revise the very high fire hazard severity zone map.
Just a little point of reference, your map's upside down.
Hey, Jen.
It could be argued the whole city's upside down, but that's better.
You're in public safety. You know,
Good morning.
Hi, Chief, how you doing?
Good. Mark Storms, Assistant Fire Marshal. We, in front of you, wish the map was a little bit bigger, sorry, but we gave you a smaller map showing the areas where we would, in 2007, the state did a GIS survey and approached us, and 2008 indicated that we needed to expand our very high severity zone into the area that was previously rated high. The issue was that we have a history of fires, the Sayre Fire, the Merrick Fire, all of those moving out of the wildland areas, and throughout the state is becoming a common phenomenon. And what they've done is they've begun to model where the flying brands move out of these areas into the neighborhoods, like, and it's happened here in the city in the past. It's happened in Chatsworth. We've had the Sayre and the Merrick, like I said previously. And the concern is that this ornamental vegetation that is growing out in these communities is just more fuel. And the survey measures fuel by satellite, and it doesn't care if it's man planted or nature planted. And the concern is here we'd like to adopt the state's map. It increases this by 6,706 parcels. Adds an additional 3,896 acres to the brush area, the high zone, the very high zone. The economic impact is minimal. It's about $87,000 in additional revenue. The workforce would absorb the additional work at this time. Chief Abarca's staff has indicated that they can handle it. The significant areas that you're going to see on the map is the Chatsworth area, where it blows down out of the Rocky Peak area, and then the re-inclusion of the Playa Vista area, where the grasslands are there, and the slopes leading up to the homes, and behind the old Howard Hughes Airport, heavily laden with grass and brush at this time.
And this was done with a scientific mapping of previous fires?
Well, they include that fire history, yes, over the last 50 years is part of the modeling process that the state uses. The modeling accounts for the fuel type, the weather, the topography, the 50-year fire history, and the modeling factor is for a 20-mile-an-hour wind.
'Cause I'm looking at, and I have no objection, most of my district portion of the map, and just for clarification, Mr. Zion and I, and probably Mr. Koretz have a good portion of this entire map. As I look at Chatsworth and the area that would be north of Chatsworth Street, which is still not in the high severity area, an area that in 1971 we lost 200 homes.
I believe that was the Clampett fire where it came down before the 118 freeway was
Yeah.
there, if I recall
Yeah,
right.
well, you have a natural fire break, but that, and you're talking about firebrands, and traditionally, the fires, as you know, blow from the north to the south and head to
Sure.
the ocean. And there's a couple of natural fire breaks, which is the 118, then you get down to Roscoe, and then you get down into Dennis's district, and once you blow those, you're rushing off to the ocean. And historically, they have jumped the 118 because of the fire, the wind that hit that area are pretty heavy. And so firebrand from north of the freeway to the south of the freeway is a regular occurrence. And I've seen many, many times in my 30 years that represent that area where the fires have jumped the 118 freeway.
Right. I think one of the factors that has led into their decision is the type conversion that's taken place in the areas above Porter Ranch. There's been so many fires in all of our memories that we all watched. You know, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. It's converted it basically from a brush model to more of a grass model, so you're going to get a lot less brands production out of the grass fuels. That's probably accounts for why we don't see that change along the 118 freeway there.
How do we go about taking another look, without slowing this process down, taking a look for future, as far as that one area of Chatsworth that I'm really concerned about? Because you have not had while in Porter Ranch you've had a change of building codes, you've lost a lot of open space, you've got a lot of green space now where it was not going to burn. The homes there are encased with the eaves and all the fire protection that we've put there, landscape requirements. That is not the case south of the 118, which was rebuilt in 1971. There's been no major changes there. So,
right. The main thing that we've seen area is the fuel has been pushed back further up the hill as that development above Porter Ranch has taken place, but that's all east of Browns Canyon. Browns Canyon is still a significant impact.
Right.
The state is currently in the process of remodeling. Again, it's their time to do it again. And the local jurisdiction can always be more restrictive than the state, so we could look at it at that point.
yeah, I'm not going to hold this up at all. We'll go forward today after Mr. Zion's questions, but I do want you to take a much stronger look at that because I think we dropped the ball on that one.
Hey, what we can do is meet with you and identify exactly the area you're concerned about.
Well, you know it very well. You know,
The Clampett fire was also very much the factor was the wood shake roofs and that style of construction at that time.
but a lot of them, that was built before our wood shake roof ordinance, so they came back with wood shake roofs.
Yes.
So I'm not going to spend a lot of time committee on that, so
Yes, sir.
we'll talk about that offline. Thank you.
The area on the northeast part, Foothill Boulevard, Wentworth, Latuna Canyon, is that the area where the station, not the station fire, the one in Mr. Alicon's district with all those mobile homes?
That would have been up above at the very top of this map, where you see the Newhall Pass would be at the very top of this map. Directly to the right, you'll see one small area that comes down.
Okay.
That's up by where the 210 makes the turn.
That's now included, that's been expanded to include this.
Yes, we did have the fire, the Sayer fire moved south of the 210 freeway in a couple of areas, so this modeling is pretty accurate to what we saw.
And the insurance cost for the homeowner, the business owner, does this designation mean it would be higher rates for insurance, fire insurance?
I believe that would be fair to say that would be a possibility that the insurance company industry may look at the changes in the state, in the map. But the areas that they're being upgraded from the high area to the very high area.
Which would have an impact on their insurance premium.
I can't say for sure, but it probably would be fair to speculate.
And the red flag alert days, would this mean additional areas for the red flag with the no parking, et cetera?
With my background in that, I don't see any of these areas that would be streets that would be affected at the red flag at this time. The only ones that might change as far as the inclusion in the Hollywood Hills area I don't see that that would significantly impact any of the red flag streets at this time.
And then the designation, when an area is added to this list, designated to this list, what other provisions are provided? Are there any other inspections, any other fees? In other words, the folks that live in the area where it's being expanded,
Right.
the impact on them financially?
The impact financially on them, the $13 initial inspection fee will apply to the 6,706 parcels. The plan, other than that, if the property owner takes care of their clearance, they even have the opt-out option there where they can clean it themselves and request to do their own inspection and opt out. There will be a public outreach. We're going to hit the homeowners associations in the areas, especially where there's been significant increases, and we're going to develop a mailer to all of the parcels that are being added, so that when it takes effect next spring, they will be previously notified.
You may want to work with the neighborhood councils also.
Yes, sir.
That's obviously an important issue. And then any other special services that's provided to those areas that are being expanded? Are there additional resources that are deployed there? In other words, are they getting any benefit for the protection of the property with this added category?
The brush task force would now include their sweep into those areas initially, which weren't swept in the past. The deployment models are already take into account the majority of these areas. The one area that isn't currently in the pre-deployment model is the Playa Vista area, but we will meet with Chief Rueda, Emergency Services Bureau. They will also be part of the notification process of the change in the designation of the properties.
And the goal is to protect those properties in time of fire.
Yeah, to get the resources as close as possible if they're under the certain red flag conditions.
Okay. And every area we've discussed, it's all within the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
All right, we have a request for speaker, Dr. Clyde Williams, to tell us what we do wrong with our fire protection system.
Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. LA Fire Department has the most stringent brush clearance requirements in the United States. However, are they enforced? My concern with this expansion is enforcement. They can't enforce, they haven't enforced. Maybe they have discretionary action in enforcing the brush clearance requirements. I can take you right now to many places, and thank God for the rain, that would have burned if ignited. Even with the current allocations, the brush fire and brush clearance requirements aren't being enforced. Now you're going to expand it more. Well, it gets $13, but that's going to increase soon. So next year, people will just pay it automatically, somewhat like the stormwater fee on the tax roll. I don't know. Here, in this particular allocation, or reallocation, wherever it went, you have Playa Vista being included in very high fire area. Playa Vista? You have the wetlands across the road from Playa Vista included. You have some little fringe of hillside, but you also have the Southern California Gas Company's gas storage facility at Playa del Rey. Why are these included? Reports. I was referenced to CAL FIRE. Well, they don't have a report regarding these particular allocations showing the basis of the surveys. They don't show how it was assigned, but very high versus not high. So there's no factual backup for these allocations. And there's no backup as to the enforcement. I went through, I'm in a very high fire area, and I went through and I did my self-clearance, and I took it over because I couldn't trust them. Because Nobody was informed as to whether they were cleared or not cleared for self-clearance. So there seems to be a lot of problems here, and it requires attention, maybe through this particular issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Williams. And with that, we'll send it forward.
I got a question regarding the enforcement question that was brought up by Dr. Williams. In addition to that, Bell Canyon, LA City Fires first in for Bell Canyon fires.
Yes,
which
but we're not
is county.
responsible for the brush clearance in Bell Canyon at this time.
That's the question. We're first in on response, but we're not responsible for the brush clearance. Is there brush clearance enforced by the county? Do they have a mandate? that they have
Ventura
listed?
County, I believe, handles theirs. They have a very comprehensive brush clearance program.
Okay. Since I know we're doing the fire and paramedic service, I wanted to make sure that they were complying so we wouldn't have undue hazards in that particular area, which is adjacent to my district.
Right. When the Topanga fire came through there was numerous conversations relative to how well the green space and the brush clearance helped them protect the homes in that area.
And then the question regarding enforcement, can you comment on that?
The enforcement issue, traditionally we end up around 98% compliance with the brush clearance that's requested. We do have the ongoing issue of addressing ornamental vegetation relative to it adding fuel, and our ordinances to control the planting of types of species, which at this time, all we can do is limit the size of them and their proximity to the structures.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. That'll move forward with the recommendation of the chair. Thank you very much. We'll jump to item 13 and 14. I think we have the most number of people here on that item.
Items 13 and 14, motion Zion Smith requesting that the city attorney prepare an ordinance to establish a residency restriction for registered sex offenders and the police department to report on the impact of such restrictions. Item 14, Board of Police Commissioners reports pursuant to motion of Resort Parks relative to procedures for monitoring sex offenders.
Morning.
Morning. How are you? I'd also like to invite, if we have a member from California Department of Parole here, I'd like to invite her up also. And do we have a representative from probation? Yes. Thank you. Captain Kevin McClure, Commanding Officer, Robbery Homicide Division, and with me I have Detective Diane Webb, who is currently assigned to RHD, the REACT coordinator of the Registration, Enforcement, and Compliance team, and she does all the monitoring of the sexual offenders for us. Diane is also a member of the California Sex Offender Management Board for the state, an appointed member of that. And as far as this report goes, she'll be discussing that. And I know that both Department of Parole and Probation would like to speak on it also.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Who's first?
In response to the request by the Public Safety Committee, I had prepared a report regarding what has been termed as clustering of registered sex offenders. As you well know, the City of Los Angeles does not have any residency restrictions on top of whatever, on top of what is already imposed by Jessica's law, and that's the 2,000 feet restriction for registered sex offenders from a K through 12 school or a park where children regularly gather. And I'm sure parole and probation can speak to this further, but review by the Attorney General's office after the initiative passed in 2006 and then was implemented in November of 2007 determined that it was applicable to registered sex offenders who are on parole, and probation can talk about which registered sex offenders that it applies to for those who are on probation. But there is some housing in Los Angeles that is outside the residence restriction area, and we have seen more sex offenders placed in those areas because, frankly, that's one of the few places that we do have. And we've seen an increase down in our harbor area, and we've also seen an increase in transient registered sex offenders, which is an issue that the California Sex Offender Management Board is very concerned about, as there's been statewide trends regarding an increase in transient offenders.
That's because they move a lot, they're identified, and community outrage forces them to move a lot, or is it just the economy? Do you have any idea why?
Well, the biggest spike and steady increase has been since Jessica's Law was implemented in November of 2007. So it's there seems to be a definite correlation to the lack of suitable housing where they actually can live.
Okay. Morning.
Good morning.
Do you have any
Questions?
do you have any statements to make up front, or?
Well, Jessica's Law, as pointed out, has made it very difficult for a dense city like the city of Los Angeles to find areas that meet that residency requirement. So it lends itself to some additional transiency. In addition to the department's ability to subsidize and assist through the transition period for parolees who are released from incarceration, it's not open-ended. There's a limited amount of time in which we provide resources for housing, and so that may have some impact as well. But as you well know, from the initial passing of Jessica's Law, we do have every sex offender that's on active parole on GPS supervision. So although they may not have a physical dwelling or a physical address, we are able to track them in the community.
How many of those are in L.A., do you know?
Excuse me?
How many of those people are in L.A. that are being tracked?
We have approximately 7, well, let me give you the exact number. We have 5,100 in Los Angeles total that are either on probation or parole. 1,794 in LA City. We have 8,600 statewide, but there are approximately 90,000 sex offenders statewide. So we're talking about a little less than 10% that are not under parole supervision. The majority are not on active parole.
Probation?
Well, my name is Richard Stickney. I'm a probation director with Los Angeles County. I'm responsible for our legislative and legal analysis, and I was asked to appear in case you had questions about the ordinance that you're talking about to compare it with the Los Angeles County ordinance.
Okay. First of all, Detective Webb, you mentioned that the city did not have an overlying restriction above and beyond the state. Have you seen the ordinances moving through the planning department right now, virtually as we speak this week, that put additional overlay restrictions on group housing, which would include sex offenders as well?
I have not seen it, though I've heard of it, that it deals mostly with zoning and sober living homes.
Well, it was started off as sober living. It's expanded to be much more broad-based, and that is group homes. So it's not sober anymore. It's just any group home. So this happens to be the problem frequently with these accumulation of probationers in one home.
Specifically, what is termed a group home, or a home where registrants are grouped?
A group home.
Okay.
And so you might take a look at that, and if you haven't got it, we'll get it over to you. You should have input into that because it's moving now rather quickly through the process. So.
Yes, I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, the number of sober living homes, group homes, has actually decreased since 2005 when we first started tracking it. And where we used to have a much higher number of registered sex offenders living in those types of homes, now it is focused and kind of reconcentrated in apartment buildings, converted commercial dwellings, specifically to address the lack of suitable housing.
Yeah, and here's where the conflict arises. Obviously, is it's in the interest of police and probation people to have as many in one place as you can. It's easier to control, but from a community standpoint, that's the last thing they want is accumulation of a whole bunch of those folks in their neighborhood. And so where you might have a motel that makes usually in a commercial district easier for everybody to accept, it's when it's in the neighborhoods, in the blocks, and the streets, and the residential communities that it becomes really a conflict of interest between police and neighborhoods. And so I think when we discussed this, we were really concerned about that schism between the two interests. Do you have any recommendations of anything you've seen in the way of best practices in other communities, particularly those of you on the state and county level, that work particularly well to solve that problem?
Well, in this particular problem, I don't know if there's anything that works particularly well. In probation, it's somewhat different in that most of our people, have not been to prison, and they're being put on, and they're still living in the community normally where their prior residence.
Mm-hmm.
We don't go out of our way to place people in any type of group setting or any of that type of thing. In fact, currently in Los Angeles County, we are not referring for probation violations on Jessica's 2,000-foot rule because of legal advice from the county council that is probably unconstitutional as written. We do have an ordinance that was written by Los Angeles County that has a similar 2,000-foot that's in place in the unincorporated areas. And what we believe that is more likely to be constitutional because it only applies to people who are convicted of the registration offense post the law being enacted. And also, it has a second piece, they would have to have moved within 2,000 feet also after the enactment. And we're comfortable in enforcing that. But we're not comfortable enforcing a 2,000-foot rule that basically does what you're talking about. It groups people in very small areas of the county and specifically certain areas of the city.
Okay. Ms. Rector, anything on that? No. Okay. Mr. Zine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The illustration for the motion came up as a result of East Los Angeles, 47 sex offenders placed on parole in an apartment building less than 2,000 feet from a high school. And then Long Beach, 19 sex offenders on parole residing in the same apartment building near 2 licensed daycare centers. And when that becomes public knowledge, obviously residents with small children go ballistic and start screaming, why aren't we doing something to protect the community, the neighborhood, and the children? L.A. County in 2009 put some tighter restrictions, and my motion is asking that we copy what L.A. County has done to try and prevent some of these tragedies. When it comes to the GPS, and I've heard that the GPS system is very effective as long as it's attached, but how often are those devices removed from the individual supposed to have them on? Where they remove them?
Are you talking for daily for charging? I mean, they're not removed unless there's a violation of parole in which they cut it and abscond, but they have them for the life of their parole period.
No, I know they're supposed to, but there's situations that I've heard about where the individual will cut them off, have them removed, and just become a free individual on the run.
Well, of course, there is that probability. It's a very small probability in terms of as soon as there's a tamper or cutting of the GPS device, there's an immediate alert. In fact, we've been working in partnership with your Razor Division. They have officers, who actually monitor our Veritrax as well. So they also serve as a safety net, but we get an immediate cellular alarm to the parole officer when there is a tamper. And so anytime we have any unconfirmed event such as that, then we automatically activate and bring up the prior tracks to see exactly where the signal was lost. We notify local law enforcement. Again, we've utilized Razor Division, and more often than not, quite quickly they're apprehended. So this is not something that happens frequently. In fact, it's fortunately for us as a community, this is not something that happens on a regular basis.
Okay, it does happen occasionally, though.
It does happen occasionally.
Okay.
And if I may add, CDCR has a great new system. It's an automatic email notification that comes directly to law enforcement. So within a day, if not the same day, when a parolee does cut off their GPS device, we get an alert. Our REACT officers are given that case. And for the most part, those individuals are apprehended fairly quickly. But what the REACT officers do also is they put together a new state case against the individual. So it's in addition to any parole violation, which unfortunately do a few months maybe for a parole violation, but a new 290 charge is a potential several-year state prison sentence.
I know the system's overloaded. There's no question the state system's overloaded. I'm sure your staff, probation, parole, are overloaded with the number of individuals that need to be monitored. There's no question that there's an economic situation where the demand is greater than the resources to handle it. What's the spread of agents you have for individuals that they have custody or control over?
For sex offenders, we have the high-risk sex offenders, the active, that's 20 to 1, and it will not exceed more than 40 to 1 on a passive, which would probably not include your high-risk sex offenders, your Penal Code 288 child molesters. So the active high-risk sex offender is 20 parolees to 1 parole officer. And on the high end, with a combination, depending on the different subsets of PC 290, could go up to 40, but not to exceed 40.
And has your personnel been reduced in numbers due to the state budget?
Not at this point. Our specialized caseloads are still being covered at the ratio intended. As a matter of fact, with parole reform, the Department of Corrections is experiencing a soon-to-be reduction of overall supervision from 71, which was our initial allotment, and our ratio to 48 to 1. So we're excited that we are continuing to grow in terms of personnel under this fiscal crisis that the state is under.
Unlike many state agencies that are losing a lot of personnel.
That is correct.
And what about in your department?
Well, in probation, we supervise at 50 to 1, which is the smallest ratio we have of any caseloads within the county. Our average caseload is closer to 200. And we have about half the probationers in the county are supervised on bank caseloads of more than 1,000.
Okay. But you're supervising not only sex offenders, you're supervising a ton of individuals that are being released from prison.
Right. I'm trying to put in context. The smallest caseload ratios that we have in Los Angeles County probation are 50 to 1. Those are our sex offenders. And I'm trying to put in context. The average caseload is much closer to 200, and over half the people that we supervise for, and these are all felons, by the way.
Right.
Are supervised at 1,000 to 1.
1,000 to 1.
Right.
That's stretching your bed pretty tight.
And
I commend you folks for what you do. I'm a reserve with the LAPD along with Mr. Smith, and formerly with LAPD for 33 years. So I've worked with parole, probation, and I've seen the demand on the personnel, and highly commended for what they do. And sometimes it's a task that you wonder, how do they keep up with the workload when you have those type of numbers you're dealing with, just like the captain when you have to deal with issues, or the detectives. I mean, sometimes those numbers are overwhelming, but then the public says, we're paying taxes, we want service, we want protection, we want our children safe. And every time an incident occurs with a sex offender, it turns out they've been arrested, they've gone to prison, they may have ended parole, probation, now they're free, and then they commit that violation again, which obviously gets the community very, very upset. And then they scream to us, why aren't you doing what you need to do to make our community safe? So there's no question it's a difficult task, and I appreciate what you folks are doing with it. The ordinance that we're looking at, and then there's obviously the enforcement, as has been mentioned earlier with the fire department. What type of enforcement? What type of enforcement do we get from a local level? What type of enforcement do we get when we put these laws? And as we know, we look at the penal code, the vehicle code, health and safety code. We've got laws about everything. But what type of enforcement do we really have to enforce those laws that are on the books with reduced expenditures? But the ordinance, as I understand, with the city attorney's office, and is there someone from the city attorney's office here on this matter?
Mr. Zine, I believe the last time this item was in committee, the request was for a report back from the police department,
Right.
And hopefully probation and parole, but no request of the city attorney, because the committee had not decided that it in fact wanted to request an ordinance. And also, while I'm on the mic, could we have the name of the representative from parole? I believe we don't have that yet for the record.
Maria Franco, I'm the Chief Deputy Parole Administrator and Acting Regional Administrator as of today.
Very nice card.
If I could just make a comment on the enforcement piece of it, we have 32 REACT officers citywide to enforce it in its entirety, and that is their main focus.
So I know that, like in the auto details, one jurisdiction, Culver City, Burbank, Pasadena, Beverly Hills, they may work together with neighboring jurisdictions. in law enforcement, sharing information. Do they do that in this category also, or is it strictly LAPD, or do they work with the adjoining communities and their other law enforcement agencies in this area?
Oh, it's imperative that all law enforcement agencies work together, and we do, because it's not just a Los Angeles issue, it's a statewide issue. So there's statewide collaboration. In fact, LAPD is hosting a training on sex offender tracking and registration enforcement at the end of this month, and we have over 20 agencies from across the state attending, including parole and probation. So it's definitely a group effort.
So everyone's pulling together to work together to
Absolutely.
keep it as safe as possible. So is there a problem in your perspective, in your view, by following this county ordinance would limit the number of sex offenders, one per any type of residential building, be it apartment, house, duplex, hotel, unless such persons are related, blood or marriage? Is that a problem?
Yes, I think it's a big
Okay.
problem.
In what manner?
It just further limits where registered sex offenders can live. It contributes to a higher transient rate. It also contributes to what is happening to Los Angeles now, the not in my backyard type stance, where offenders, registrants go to where there is available housing. And according to the 2008 report from the California Sex Offender Management Board that examined studies from across the nation, that there is no tie between residency restrictions and reduced recidivism. In fact, it's the instability in housing that can lead to higher rates of reoffense. The public perception, unfortunately, is a perception, but it's really not based in fact, at least from what the studies have shown. And other states, Colorado, for example, has formalized shared living arrangements in facilities where there is supervision. Los Angeles, in the harbor, some of the facilities there do have security systems, somewhat of a management system. And to my knowledge, there haven't been problems associated with that. California doesn't have a set program at this time for making housing available. We have budgetary concerns, but that's where the management board is moving and making recommendations on what would be better served for public safety, better living arrangements as opposed to residency restrictions.
Okay, but when we have 47 sex offenders placed on parole in the apartment building, and I don't know if they're employed or not, if it's difficult for them to get occupation or some type of employment, well, there's 47 and they're hanging out in the neighborhood, I'm sure the community would be very upset with that, and that's the concern. If they come out and they get gainfully employed and they mold with the community versus stand out on the street corner of 47 individuals, that obviously would create an issue for a community. What we're trying to do is how do we balance this in a residential area, an apartment area, how do we balance where the folks living there can live in relative peace and tranquility, at the same time accommodate the folks that are being released parole probation without having this negative impact on the community. Because I know that most people would not want to have 47 sex offenders next to their residence if they've got small children. If they're adults, maybe they don't care. If they got small children, I'm sure they would care.
Of course they don't, and that is essentially the problem, that nobody wants registered sex offenders around them, and they don't want them grouped, even if the studies show that grouping and close supervision is actually more beneficial to the community than a higher transient rate. Okay. That location in El Sereno was a motel, and we had been there, the REACT units had been there and closely supervised that, and it was mostly parolees placed there. And actually the facility was conducive to close supervision. It was just too close to a satellite high school location that was affiliated, I believe, with Cal State LA.
Correct, it was. And that obviously hits the headline, and that obviously generates the public outcry. Do something, do something. So LA County, as I understand, they enacted this ordinance, which there is this restriction. That's whether it's enforced or not, I don't know, but they've got this according to our notes.
But I wanted to explain the difference between this legislation and other legislation in that is only applies to people that are convicted of the registered offense after, the passage of it, and also if they move, it's kind of a double-edged. They can still return to their original residence if they were there at the time of the conviction. What it does do is it does help in this grouping issue because we're not grouping people. In other words, the concern, we're allowing them to return at this point to their residence unless they fall into this particular criteria. I would say, too, having had to do all the studies and so on and so forth, we do need to find a way that these people aren't becoming transients because we can't track them very well even with GPS. You don't know exactly what they're doing. And again, if you have them someplace where you know where they're at, they're much easier to supervise.
But
there needs to be some type of balance.
Is the grouping a problem for your department, or is it easier for your department?
We don't have the same problem because, as a general rule, we're not dealing with the same level of offender. These are people in parole that have actually gone to prison. They've come out of prison for a serious offense.
And your folks haven't done that?
Most of ours haven't. Right now, we only have about 10 people that have scored at high risk on the risk assessment tool, but the state's risk assessment tool. The rest of ours are medium or low risk.
Well, I still think in the interest of public safety, I would prefer to err on the side of caution for the residents, people who are paying the taxes, people who ask us to protect them and their families, that something other than a group facility where there's 20, 30, 40, whatever, which would have a negative impact on a neighborhood. I'm sure it would have a negative impact on any neighborhood, whether it's apartments or single-family residents, when we have those situations. What's going through planning, would that be addressing this particular issue?
Yeah.
In addition to the other homes?
Yeah, it deals with aggregation in the community, so you don't have like 4 or 5 in a neighborhood. They have to be so many feet apart. They have the normal 1,000 feet from schools and daycare centers, that kind of stuff. I don't think we go to 2,000, but I'm going to go back and look at that ordinance. I'd like to see a copy of what the county did and look at next to what we're looking in planning. But again, it deals with group homes, so you would catch this situation. I don't know if it dealt with grouping in a motel, a commercial venture, versus a R3 residential or just a house that's converted into a housing. We'll have to go look at that. And so I was going to ask Detective Webb if you would stop by my office on the way out of the building down to 405, get a copy of the draft ordinance from Phyllis if she's in, and if not, ask her to get it to you. I think we need your input into that. I think it would be very beneficial for all of us to have that. I appreciate that.
According to notes I have, El Monte, Long Beach, Palmdale, Pomona, and West Covina have all enacted ordinances addressing this particular issue of clustering. So I don't know if that's a benefit or a negative, but it's not only the sex offender issue of clustering, but it's the issue of people coming out from prison for a variety of charges. And we have a nice, quiet residential neighborhood where it's a nice home. A person comes in and purchases it, separates the rooms, divides the rooms, and it becomes a cluster, whether they're robbers or burglars or murderers, whatever the case may be. There's a whole group of them, and that's what comes into the negative impact of the neighborhood. And in my district, Woodland Hills, we have some large homes. That's taken place. We get a lot of complaints about that. So it's not just the sexual offenders that we're talking about. It's other folks that are coming out of the penal institutions that are going to those neighborhoods. And obviously it does not add well to the climate in those communities that have had a single-family residence with families for a long period of time.
I would like to make one comment because I wasn't able to attend the planning commission meeting. And I want to say this in the context of someone who does live in a single-family home in the city of Los Angeles within about 200 feet of the elementary school where my children have attended. And that's that if we want an ordinance that we can enforce, we need one that's constitutional and does take into some, consideration both sides of the coin. One of the things that I was concerned about with the one that's going through planning right now is it said basically any building in which you have a parolee, or also the way it's worded, because they're talking sensitive offenders, it could be a probationer, living in that building would have to get a conditional permit. that means they can't even go back to their house after they get released from jail until they get a conditional permit. I think that if you leave, if it's written in these kinds of matters where they're so broad, I think when you get into court, you're going to have a problem being able to enforce it. For example, Long Beach has a moratorium on theirs because we were attempting to enforce theirs. Now there's a moratorium. There's a court case going on right now with Jessica's Law on the 2,000-foot here in Los Angeles County. There's hearings, and they've placed a moratorium on it. I think it's important that you balance individual rights with the community so that they make sense when they get into court. And I certainly support your idea of not having, like I said, 48 people in one place or homes. In my neighborhood, for example, I'd be uncomfortable if across the street there were 8 sex offenders. I certainly agree with that. On the other hand, I'm certainly aware that there are a number of sex offenders who are living in, in a block or 2 or 3 of my home. And, they seem to be doing okay.
Well, there's that, and it comes on the computer, where, what's that called?
You're talking about Megan's Law?
No, there's another one that tells you if some sex offender live in your neighborhood.
Oh, yeah, Watchdog.
Watchdog.com. I don't know how accurate that is, but that pops up now and then, which and I guess you have to pay for the specific information.
Right.
It gives you like an indication there's some person who's been released, they're in that neighborhood, and you start looking, because I live in a neighborhood where they've got small kids, and obviously the parents are always talking to me about this issue about safety, and the kids walking to school and play in the front yard, and one abduction creates havoc in a whole city. So obviously it doesn't happen every day, thank goodness, but when it does, it creates a huge issue. And those tragedies that we know, Adam Walsh in particular, who was kidnapped, and what his dad has done, America's Most Wanted, and that's one individual that has created worldwide attention to it. Obviously what we want to do is the right thing, and there's obviously constitutional issues that we have to follow. And the balance, as you said, and it's an appropriate point, it's got to be a balanced approach. If it's lopsided, it'll be unconstitutional and we'll have nothing. So your comments are...
And I think to assuage your fears, the conditional use requirement is on a group home. So to establish a group home, they'd have a conditional use process, which allows us then to put restrictions and controls, not on an individual. So if you just get released from prison, you're going home, you don't have to have a conditional use on your home now because you're an ex-felon.
Well,
so I would just on a group.
Excuse me. I would just ask for you folks to go back and take a second look at that ordinance. That's, I know that's the intent, but I am saying if you read it, it just says any building. It doesn't say any building used as a group home. It says any building where you have a sentenced offender that's under the supervision of it says CDR specifically, but it also could apply to probation because it's so broadly written, because our people are sentenced to probation.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. And it's not the intent, I'm sure, so.
And I'm sure it's not.
If that's an error, we'll fix that, yeah. I appreciate that. We'll appreciate that very much.
To address it here.
Yep, perfect.
Oftentimes it gets down the wrong track, and then we've got to bring it back on the right track.
It's best time to fix it now. So thank you for that information, and I thank all of you for coming, and appreciate your being here today and enlightening us. And Detective, you'll get a copy of that. I think your input will be very valuable, particularly in light of what the gentleman from probation just said, too. That might make a big difference. So thank you for that. We do have one public comment, so Dr. Williams, the floor is yours.
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno, Northeast LA, also member of the executive board of the LA 32 Neighborhood Council. And this particular issue came up several months ago and apparently has contributed to this. One of the things I would suggest is that the neighborhood councils are there. They're in the neighborhoods. They're in the communities. They can identify things very quickly if they know what's going on. One of the reasons why it became a subject of one of our meetings was somebody had noticed the number of addresses being coincident. So what I would suggest is that any database revision of the ordinance and such be distributed to all of the neighborhood councils, or at least give us access to those so that we can, within the community, determine the 2,000 feet. And also, I would highly recommend that you add recreation areas, because they're sometimes separated from parks and things like that. So we would be quite encouraged to provide, volunteer efforts through our safety committees, and most of the neighborhood councils have safety committees. Neighborhood block watches, all of those things can contribute to providing more feedback into the system to the designated officers and such, so that we can better coordinate with the city offices, but also so that the neighborhoods know that what's going on in their community is recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, and just FYI for you that if the ordinance going through planning is approved, the conditional use process would automatically notify you, because all neighborhood councils on the early notification system, so that you'll be in the loop. So thank you very much. With that, thank you again for all of you being here today. We'll take the recommendation, and John, if we could, can we send the two replies we have that we got back to the planning staff, so that they can see this information as they finalize the draft on the ordinance that's being worked on in the planning department?
Sorry, Councilman, you wanted items 13 and 14 to be also referred to Plum Committee?
Well, no, that'll take forever.
Okay.
The responses from the police commission, and the two responses we got here.
Okay.
So if you would, the items you gave us, the responses, just send the responses to the planning staff.
Okay.
And let that are working on it. Do we know the name of who's drafting that? No? We'll find out.
Sure.
Who's working on that draft ordinance. I think the information may be very beneficial to them.
I'll do that.
All right, thank you. And that'll be a note and file then?
Was this 13 and 14 or just 13?
13 and 14.
So 14 is note and file, and item 13 is?
Thank you.
Refer the information to the planning staff.
But for item 13, is there any action on that, or also note and file, or do you want to move forward with the request for the ordinance?
It's going to planning.
You could use 13 as the carrier for bringing the information to the planning department then, and receive and file 14, or note and file 14.
Okay.
Does that work?
So no action on 13 other than the forward information to planning?
Yeah.
Okay.
That works?
Yes.
That works. All right. Item number 9.
Item 9, communications from the mayor and CAO report relative to modifying the program budgets of fiscal years 2007, 2008, Regional Catastrophic Preparedness Grant Program. This item is also referred to the Personnel Committee.
What number are we on?
9er. 9er.
Yes.
So this is real simple, real good. I just had one question regarding, in the past, we kept an inventory of contractors that we'd use in emergency operations preparedness, et cetera. Is that still being maintained?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Okay. In the past, we had a list of contractors that would perform some of this work, and we get into catastrophic preparedness, and then fixing existing plans, building regional planning, et cetera, all the stuff that this does. We kept a contractor list of pre-approved contractors that we could move in to begin work on these kind of programs if we had a catastrophic disaster. Do we still maintain those lists?
Anna Burton from the Emergency Management Department. The list of contractors that's maintained by General Services specific to products and other services. The list of requests today for permission to enter into contracts is to bring vendors on board to do regional planning, which will include Los Angeles County, Riverside, San Bernardino, and some of the adjacent counties. So the lists for requests today does not include any vendors that the city would currently have.
This is just for for people preparing plans then, not for contractors that are going to do work.
No.
There are separate kind of
right, there
contractor
are
lists.
Specific to some services and some vendors who would do software designs that would extend beyond the city and the county.
Okay. Mr. Zine?
Nothing.
Nothing? We'll move that forward. The recommendation, thank you. Probably could have asked you that earlier, but we didn't have time, so.
Oh, no worries.
Thank you very much. And item number 12.
Item 12, Board of Police Commissioners and CAO reports relative to amending the Police Department's contract with the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, increasing the contract amount by $144,210 for a 3-day presentation of the Robert Presley Institute of Criminal Investigation Detective Symposium.
Good afternoon. My name is Samira Smith. I'm a detective with the LAPD.
Okay.
And I'm with Commander Maislin, Personnel and Training Bureau I'm not
And
sure.
CAO. All right.
Mr. Zine, this was your baby last time.
Commander,
Mr. Zine?
Detective 3. I've got a question regarding Post. It's my understanding that Post gives us money for programs. We don't pay for them, we get reimbursed for programs. And the question came up during a previous meeting on the expenditure, $144,210. Are we paying for something, or are we getting reimbursed, or is there a payment, then a reimbursement? That couldn't get answered before.
We're getting reimbursed.
Okay.
We're going to use a revolving training fund, lay out the $144,000. The reason for the contract is to ensure that we get reimbursed by Post for doing this. We're doing this for them.
Okay, that was the question, is it was an expenditure, and I couldn't understand why we're expending money on Post when Post is designed to reimburse law enforcement agencies for the training.
And that's what they're
last
doing.
time we had a meeting, Detective Edo, qualified D3, was not able to respond to that because he didn't have the information. So I just want to make sure we're getting the funds that we should receive for the training that's
We
conducted.
absolutely will.
So $144,210.
Yes.
How much of it
A
goes?
maximum of that.
How much of it goes to you?
Pardon?
How much of it goes to you?
Not a penny.
Okay, that was the only question I had, and I appreciate you coming down for this
You've had her
stressful
pins,
time.
you had her in pins and needles over this for the
I know.
past hour and a half, and that was the question?
She was all worried about this one. She doesn't get to come here too often.
Okay.
But you're a great D3. Commander,
Thank
she's
you.
a wonderful D3.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. With that, moves forward with approval of the chair.
Thank you.
That brings us to the conclusion of today's agenda. We have two public comments, Dr. Clyde Williams and Phyllis Doherty. Oh, well. That doesn't give you 4 minutes, Phyllis.
Make that much shorter. Right, Phyllis Doherty. This is probably the most important thing I've ever come to you with. This makes Ed Boakes look small. I'm very, very concerned that there was a violation of the Brown Act at the last Los Angeles Animal Services Commission meeting, and I believe it was intentional on the by the general manager because even staff was not aware that this wording was added on. Not on the agenda, not on the report, but when the motion, it looks as if it's adjusted, and after they redefined cat and dog kennels as those that have 6 or more animals, which means that we'll now have what is, if this passes, what has always been a dog kennel will now be in everybody's backyard. And you talk about danger, everything that Mr. Zine said about the dangers to children will happen with animals. But it adds on here, excluding animals in temporary foster care. Mrs. Burnett has announced on television, I put a link in here, it can be seen, that she intends to foster out adult animals from the shelter. Most of course, for us, are pit bulls, and she wants to do 2,000 per shelter. That would be 14,000 adult animals out there fostered, not owned by the people, still owned by the city. And that's the reason for trying to do this animal increase. That, along with the fact that it's the breeders. And I'm very alarmed that 3 commissioners, Mr. Koretz and Mr. Rosendahl, and the mayor's office were all involved in selecting her for this. And of course, we know about the ties to breeders. It's the breeders that advertise the town hall meetings, not the department. This is one of the comments. Okay, LA, I wish this was happening here. I could have 5 dogs. Here's your chance to support the bullies by Papa Pitt. This is what you can expect to see happening in the city. I've already taken it to the city attorney because nobody questioned this. Something else you need to know, the employees have been threatened. This was issued by Ms. Barnett. You have a copy of it, and I want to read this one, just one line to you. That she's talking about hiring this new assistant, or this DFO, who is not with the city, had 1.5 years as an animal control officer. I know him, that's it. It was 10 years ago or something like that. And she says, if you decide, this was posted for the employees, if you decide that you are going to take it upon yourself to prove that they cannot do their job, then I fear that you would be playing into the hands of people who would solve budget issues by continuing to cut LAAS staff and services, and no one will be able to help you or the animals. That's just part of it. Above that, she tells them they need to be loved by the community, which means the ADL and the rescuers and so forth. We don't hire them for love. Other professions do that. So I'm very, very concerned. In addition to this, just so you know this, one of our animal control she's an officer, she's a lieutenant, was extremely, extremely demeaned and insulted at the last commission meeting, and by an attorney, and the commissioners joined in with it. And if we expect our animal control officers to stay under these conditions and try to work with unlimited animals, go into yards where there are numerous, this is for the breeders. If this passes, this will be totally no limitation on animals. Once you say that they can exclude animals in temporary foster care, any animal in the city, and this is exactly what the breeders want. They've already notified us that they may refile their appeal against our spay-neuter ordinance. So first it'll be unlimited animals, and then appeal against the spay-neuter ordinance and try to get rid of that. And the AKC has exactly what they want in the city. It's extremely, I'm worried about the danger. I'm getting ready to sell my properties. It'll be extremely dangerous. Nobody will be able to walk in a community. So I hope you're very aware that this is more than just a nice little increase of 2 dogs and 2 cats.
Thank you very much. And that is, we're tentatively planning on hearing that first week of December. Tentatively, we will hear that early December.
We need to try to not even get to that point. I already.
Well, we can't, we have to hear it.
I know that, but it may not. There may be some things come up on this. This is extremely serious, extremely dangerous.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's agenda. Thank you very much. All right, Semper Fi. No, that's for the file. And I can go with these.